Hello and welcome to another episode of A Fresh Perspective with Jeff Charles. With me, your favorite political commentator, Jeff Charles, where I prefer truth over narrative and principles over politics. And I've got another fire conversation for you guys today. Actually, this will be my first interview of 2023. So I know it's been a while. I took a little time off. I had to. When you live in politics the way I do, you need a break or else you go a little bit nuts. And I'm already a little nuts, so I don't need to be any more nuts. But anyway, before I bring my guest on, I want to remind you to like this video, share this video, and hit that subscribe button and hit that notification bell. That way you'll be updated whenever I upload a new interview, which I do every Wednesday and Friday evening at 7 o'clock Eastern. Now, there have been a lot of things going on in the news today. I know that, what's going on with the Republican House Speaker kerfuffle is going on, and I don't care about any of that. So I might talk about that on other stuff, but honestly, who cares? I mean, it doesn't matter. The Republicans are going to screw you anyway. But I digress. But I do want to talk about other issues that I haven't really talked about that much before, especially when it concerns the military, war, and all of that not so good stuff. So I'm going to bring on my guest. He is a former Black Hawk pilot turned conscientious objector. He is a writer and a Christian anti-war activist. Welcome, Mr. Clay Huston. How you doing, brother?
Hey, I'm great, Jeff. Thanks for having me on. And I'm very honored to be your first interview of 2023. That's great.
Yeah, it's funny. I just realized that when I just started my little thing there, I was like, oh, this is going to be my first interview of the year.
I love it. I love it. And you're absolutely right. What a crazy start. Just so much drama already.
Yeah, and I'm not surprised. I expect, because usually after the midterm elections, there's a little bit of a reprieve, but I'm like, no, this time there's not going to be much of one, because I knew that Trump was going to announce his candidacy, and I knew all kinds of other shenanigans were going to happen, and sure enough, they are.
Yeah. No surprise.
Yeah. Now, you and I met when on Twitter, basically, with Donnie and I doing our Liberty Spaces, which we've been doing over the past month or so. We just started talking about matters pertaining to liberty, especially since I'm aligning more with the liberty movement now. And you've been a fixture on those spaces, and we've had some conversations, especially about criminal justice. But I really want to kind of learn more about the work that you do. So why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm like you said, former Black Hawk pilot turned conscientious objector. I'm currently in the process of being separated from the Army. I've been in the Army for 10 years. First, I was in the Illinois National Guard. I'm originally from Illinois, but now I live in Houston, Texas. And I've been in the Army Reserves since 2019, after I got out of flight school. But yeah, that's been a whole journey, and I think we'll get into that later. But kind of, I want to use my experience to connect with other veterans as well. Anybody that's in my position that wants to get out of the military but might be having a hard time doing it, or anybody that feels alienated from the military. I want to connect with those sorts of people. I want to tell their stories and help them out however I can, and connect them with some of the resources that I've been blessed to connect with in the past. But yeah, I think that first space that I jumped into was about a month ago, and we were talking about criminal justice, which is I think how we fell on each other's radar. So if you want to jump into that, I've got a whole bunch of stuff lined up that I would love to talk about, specifically about Houston and Harris County. I recently started doing some part-time work for a nonprofit here in Houston called Restoring Justice, and they provide legal counsel as well as some other social services to indigent inmates. If you don't know what that means, basically that means you can't afford your own attorney. And I think everybody is aware of that one crazy stat that America houses 25% of the world's prison population, even though we're only 5% of the world population. And Harris County is no small part of that. The Harris County jail system is in an absolute it's a mess right now. And it all kind of came to a pinnacle about a month ago when the 27th person in 2022 alone died in custody. And that young man's name was Matthew Shelton. And this is the story I told on the Twitter space. Matthew Shelton, he turned himself in for a DWI charge and was, brought into holding, of course. And only a few days, I think it was less than a week after he was brought into holding, he was found dead in his cell. He had slipped into a diabetic coma and died in the jail while in custody, of course. And that's because the prison guards refused to give him his prescribed insulin. And like I said, that's the 27th person in 2022 alone. And there's a lot of reasons why the Harris County has reached that sort of figure. The overcrowding is out of control. They've reached the point where they are now busing inmates to two separate private facilities. And I believe one of them is in Louisiana. And Axios reported not too long ago that Harris County Jail, they're spending upwards of $35 million to move these inmates into contract with these private prisons. And they've moved 981 people as of mid-December. And they're moving more people weekly. And so this overcrowding has caused issues not only with case backlogs, but with just like from the beginning of the booking process. There was a story that came out also I think it was back in September. The Texas Jail Commission actually investigated the Harris County jail system because a woman submitted a complaint after she was held in booking. Just in they have some booking cells, but they also just have like an open floor in the Harris County jail with some chairs that they handcuff you to. She spent 99 hours in booking, and the maximum is supposed to be 48. Wow. So I don't think they are given much access to hygiene in that time. Mm-hmm. I'm sure they're fed and given water, of course, but overall, just that's a horrible situation to find yourself in. And after that investigation, the Texas Jail Commission, they issued a report and gave the Harris County Jail a non-compliance rating. And I've got that pulled up here. Let me find it real quick. Yeah, they sent a letter to Judge Hidalgo and to the sheriff, telling them that they are non-compliant. So Harris County jail system is officially, I think you could say they're breaking the law now. Which there's plenty more examples of them doing that. Let me navigate back to my notes.
Well, while you're looking that up, just a quick question: what is it that's causing these backlogs and overcrowding and these delays in the booking process?
Yeah. So some of the reporting that I've read, the backlogs began back in I think it was 2015 with Hurricane Harvey, because there was some damage to the courthouse. So that slowed things down. And then of course the pandemic slowed things down even more. The courthouse was totally shut down, and I think they moved to trying to process cases online, but it's way too slow. Policing practices, of course, contribute to the backlog. More people are being arrested. And there was also Senate Bill 312 was passed, and that implemented some stricter bail practices. And I believe I got it right here. So Senate Bill 6 will bar those accused of violent crimes from being released from jail before trial unless they can put up cash. So, a lot of poor inmates, they can't put up cash, and so they're stuck in jail, which kind of leads into a huge civil liberties violation, to where the Harris County Jail, let me find it, as of today, the Harris County Jail population, there are, as soon as it pulls up, there's nearly 8,000 inmates that are pre-trial, and they're simply in there because they can't afford bail. And which is, it goes against everything that I was ever taught in school, that you're innocent until you're proven guilty. Yeah. Yet these people are being held in jail. The average stay on the Harris County statistics dashboard, it reads the average stay is 200 days, and the median is 107. So the majority of Harris County inmates will be in jail for over 107 days.
Yeah, over 3 months.
Yeah, without being convicted of anything. That's unbelievable to me.
Yeah, so
And
much for a
there's
fair and speedy trial, right?
yeah, there's nothing speedy about it. There's nothing fair about it. Um, and so this whole situation has developed into what people are calling the plea mill. And so basically, in Harris County, the way the public defender's office works is they have a dedicated public defender force. And, that's a set of salaried lawyers.
Mm-hmm.
But then you also have private lawyers that can be appointed to someone's case, and the judges do the appointing.
Okay.
And even though the um, the Harris County Public Defender's Office can handle 20% of indigent cases, only as of November, only 13% of all indigent cases are being assigned to the Public Defender's Office, and the rest are being assigned to private attorneys. And most of these private attorneys have a higher caseload limit than the state recommends. And so these private attorneys are assigned these cases, and most of them have a higher workload than they can really handle. And so now most of these indigent inmates, a lot of them will never see their court appointed attorney before they make it to court, for their court appearance. That's their court appearance is the first time they'll see their attorney. There are countless stories of this.
Wow.
Yeah, it's really horrible. They're just being these people are just being ignored. And so because their lawyer doesn't have the time, or the energy, doesn't have the bandwidth to properly represent them, they're forced to take whatever plea they can get. And that's why we call it the plea mill, because the prosecutor's office, they just offer whatever plea that they want, and these inmates are pretty much forced to take it. And there's a pretty perverse incentive in all of it, because the lawyers that are being assigned to these indigent cases also happen to be the lawyers that contribute the most to judges' election campaigns. So judges are appointing these lawyers, and in return, the lawyers contribute to their campaigns, and the lawyers make it an easy case on the judge. They try to make it as easy as possible on the judge. They're not gonna fight for their clients. They're just trying to get it over and done with and collect their check from the courthouse. And all of that contributes to this overcrowding. And they call that the pay to play judges. It's a whole
Yeah, that's
it's
a
a whole
whole
mess.
mess. Yeah, yeah. I mean, especially when you go down the rabbit hole and you see all the various factors that lead to this. And I know we're talking about Harris County, but this happens all
Yeah.
across the country, where you do have
Right.
these perverse incentives, like you brought up, for these lawyers who are supposed to be representing their clients, and instead it's more like they're just trying to make life easier on the judge. It's one of the most egregious parts of our criminal justice system. So at Restoring Justice, what kind of work do they do as far as trying to mitigate some of this?
Well, they provide free legal counsel, free legal representation, as well as some social services. They offer trauma informed counseling, and they do several programs. They also have a bail and bond program. And they do seasonal things like help out their clients with Christmas gifts and that sort of stuff, and food from time to time. They have a staff of lawyers that they're not affected by there's no monetary incentive in it for them, so they're free to spend as much time on the case as they can. And a great example, they recently had a client get off, and I wrote a story about it for them, and it's an incredible story. There's this guy, and I'll omit his name,
Sure.
but there was a client of theirs who was arrested a few years ago after falsely being accused of abuse by his now ex-girlfriend. And it turns out that his girlfriend was actually the one abusing him, but that was kind of he was in this whole abusive cycle, and that was kind of like her lever of power, is whenever he tries to leave, she calls the cops on him, that sort of thing. Eventually those allegations are taken seriously, the cops arrest him, and he's put in jail. And luckily he had a friend that helped him make bail and connected him with Restoring Justice, and they got started on his case. And it took years. And that's the great thing about Restoring Justice, is they're not trying to get these cases over and done with as quick as possible so they can collect their check. They're going to put in the time and the work. And this case took years. And over the course of their investigation, they uncovered several points of state corruption. And
Mm.
hopefully we're able to put a little bit more like journalistic work into this and maybe get it out into the press. But uh, the first point of corruption that they uncovered was one of the arresting officers was actually under investigation for aggravated assault against a minor, which calls his credibility into question. He probably shouldn't have been on the force to begin with while under investigation. And the prosecutors covered that up.
Mm.
And the second point was the prosecutor's office. Not only did they refuse to charge the client's ex-girlfriend with assault because there was physical evidence that she had run him over with a car, and there was physical evidence of that altercation when the officers arrested him. The prosecutor's office refused to charge her, but they also offered her immunity against perjury, so she would lie against the client, and so that they could put him away. Crazy
Wow.
stuff like this. And one of the most infuriating parts of it for me, and this is just like my own pet peeve. I personally feel that judges have a little bit too much power when it comes to these things. But one of the judges proceeding over the case, um, tried to kind of strong arm the client into pleading guilty. He tried to leverage a surprise drug test to get a guilty plea out of the client. He said, "You can either plead guilty now, or you're gonna do a drug test, and if you fail, I'm gonna take you into custody, and you'll be charged with a drug charge." And so that's just one story. I don't know how often things like this are going on. It's probably rampant, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of corruption. I mean, we always talk about corruption at the federal level. No, it happens at the
Yeah,
state and at the local level too. I mean, anytime you have a government, there's going to be corruption in it. And since it's
right.
set up to protect themselves, it's hard to really stop it.
Yeah, yeah. And but thankfully, restoring justice, because they're great lawyers, they uncovered all of this, and I think they managed to get a new judge. Is how they got around some of the judicial corruption and all this. But they uncovered all of it. They laid out a very persuasive case, and before the jury questions were ever finalized, the prosecutor's office emailed the court and dropped all the charges, all of them. So he
Mm.
was off scot free, reunited with his son. It's a great moving story of the work that they're able to do, and it, and how they're able to give the people that can't afford it the legal representation that they deserve and that they need if they're not going to be railroaded by the system.
Yeah, and it sounds like the system is doing a lot of railroading in this context.
Plenty of railroading going on.
Has there been options as far as filing lawsuits against judges, against parts of the justice system to, bring about some accountability? Or
Yeah. um, I'm not certain if there has been recently, but the founder of Restoring Justice, he started out as a public defender in Galveston, Texas, and during his experience in Galveston, he ran into a judge that took him off of cases because uh, I forget exactly what the quote is, but the judge said something along the lines of, "You're spending too much time on these cases. Like, you have to get through these cases quicker." And so the judge started taking him off cases, and all of that led into a lawsuit. And the Restoring Justice founder made it into the New York Times. This whole story made it into the New York Times.
mm,
So it was kind of a big deal. And he filed a lawsuit against the judge, and I think it ended up settling. I don't remember exactly how it ended, but one of the outcomes was the judge had to promise to follow the law, essentially. Which you would think would be obvious and kind of like the starting point, but you got to make judges swear to follow the law.
yeah, to uphold that pesky document, the Constitution. I mean, you would think. I mean, I get that that's what the system, the legal system is there for, but it shouldn't have to be used in this way. Like
Right.
they do swear to uphold an oath, and they're supposed to be doing their jobs, not trying to make things easier on themselves. They're
Yeah.
supposed to
Right.
just be adjudicating these cases. It's just it's insane to me that this is going on. It's not surprising because I read a lot about this stuff, and I do cover it quite a bit, but this is just another area or another reason why it's so important to be involved in your local and state level politics. Do you know if, I mean, we have, I'm in Texas too, so we have our legislative session coming up. Do you know if any of these issues are going to be addressed in this legislative session, or are they focus on other stuff?
I'm not certain. There is an organization called Texas Jail Project, and they're pretty involved with pushing policy. So if there is a session coming up where they're going to address some of those issues, I think Texas Jail Project is probably going to be involved. But I'm not certain. I don't know the details of that off the top of my head.
Mhm. Okay.
But yeah, I really like the local focus that you and Donnie take it in the Twitter Spaces. And I came across this other story that I think you'll find interesting,
Sure.
especially since you're in Austin. But I don't know how long you've lived there, but are you aware of the whole text tag toll fee thing that went on a couple years ago?
Yep.
Were you victimized by that? Because it seemed
Yep.
like everybody was.
Yep. Yes, most definitely. It's funny, and I don't know if you were on the Spaces, but when that actually came up, well, my mom actually popped on, and she was talking about how that affected a lot of people. I was one of them, but there were a ton of them.
Yeah. So like I got some of the details pulled up in front of me. But in 2013, TxDOT, they executed a $97 million contract with Xerox State and Local Solutions, and this company was supposed to handle all text tag operations. But they totally mismanaged the contract, and customer complaints got so bad that the company was fined $177,000. That fine didn't really do too much because they continued to have horrible customer service, and they charged erroneous and enormous fees to customers. One of the highlighted examples that I saw on the news was the guy whose late wife had an account in collections, and it accrued $27,500 in admin fees or late fees.
Wow.
Because and this guy was never notified that the account was in collections, and so it's just sitting there unpaid, racking up these late fees. And so by 2015, TxTag had millions of accounts in collections, owing nearly $1 billion.
Yep.
And
I remember
bills
that.
were being sent to the wrong addresses. Their system was supposed to sync with the DMV to associate your bill with your current address and your license plate. It wasn't doing that. People had credit cards on file, and they were failed to be charged. So it is like this late fee scam, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And TxDOT ended up ending the contract with the company. And in 2015, TxDOT refunded $1.7 million to customers. And after, when all is said and done, they waived $1.3 billion in late fees that this company was trying to collect. A $97 million contract just to handle the operations. And they ended up having to waive $1.3 billion in late fees. What a scam. It's incredible.
Yeah, it was a scam. It was tons of incompetence, and it was amazing because people were just like, I'm not going to pay this. Like, this doesn't make any sense.
Why would you?
This is crazy. Like, you can do what you want. I'm not going to pay this because it was like almost like extortion. Like it was bad. It's funny that you bring that up because we were literally just talking about this like a couple weeks ago. It was horrible.
But without some hard work from some local people, that never would have been uncovered. It never would have been fixed. Those refunds never would have been issued, or those late fees waived. So in my opinion, if you're going to be an activist, it should be on a local level. So I really like that you guys take that focus in your spaces.
Yeah, and we'll definitely be doing it more throughout 2023 because I think people don't realize the power that they have.
Right.
And it's designed to convince us of that, right? We're supposed to be convinced that we can't really do anything, that our votes don't matter, that our actions don't matter. Well, if you want it to matter, you got to focus local, because that is really where it matters the most. So, because I get a lot of, especially disaffected Republicans talking about how they're not going to send any more money to the GOP, and how they're not going to vote for them anymore, but then they feel like they're wasting their votes. I'm like, well, maybe you feel that way because you're only focused at the federal level. If you go down to the government that's closest to you, Now you have more power. Now you can actually get more liberty-minded individuals into these offices. So I
Yeah.
think it's going to take a almost like a re-education. I hate to use that term, but it is almost like a re-education and a cultural renaissance where people realize, hey, you know what? I've been focusing on the wrong thing. I mean, you
Yeah.
don't want to ignore the federal government or your state government, but it should be the other way around. We've got the pyramid upside down. The
Yeah, for
top
sure.
priority should be your mayor, city council, sheriff, and all that good stuff. So I'm definitely glad that more people are waking up to that, and I'm glad that people like you are really emphasizing that, because stories like the ones that you just told kind of hammer the point home of why this stuff is
Right.
important. I mean, you may not be the one who's caught up in Harris County's jail system, but you might know somebody who is. There might be a family member, and even if there isn't, the fact that it's happening in your community, yeah, you should have a problem with that,
Yeah,
definitely.
it should infuriate you. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Um,
oh, go, you were going to say something?
um, yeah, and I think I said it in one of the Twitter spaces, but I really like to say that most tyranny happens on a local level.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how many people are arrested by an FBI agent? Not very many. It's
Yeah.
it's the local cops that do the arresting and that beat up people. So that's why your focus should be local.
Definitely. One of the things that really highlighted this for me last year around this time, a friend of mine, his name is Jeremy Story, and he's up in Round Rock, and he was basically showing up to his school board meetings, and not just for the critical race theory and the gender stuff,
Hmm.
but they were acting in a very corrupt manner, and how they were hiring the superintendent who had a lot of issues and trying to kind of sneak him in without letting the community know. And that turned into a whole mess. I did 2 interviews with him so far. I need to actually reach out to him to see how things are going. But they had armed security drag him out of the room, and then later they arrested him. He wasn't being rowdy. He was literally just standing up there with his laptop, reading from the code or law or whatever, reading his notes. And then they took him out, and then a few days later they arrested him in front of his family. Totally corrupt. Totally corrupt. And they ended up, I mean, he and one other person had to like spend the night in jail, and then they let him out. They didn't charge him with anything. That was meant to send a message. So I'm like,
Of
so
course.
so even back then I was telling people, no, you've got some corrupt stuff happening in your local governments, and you just don't know about it because it's not affecting you yet, but you got to
Yeah.
be aware of that stuff. So yeah, these are the conversations that we need to be having. But I did want to pivot to the anti-war angle, and I wanted to have you kind of, you mentioned that you were a former Black Hawk pilot and you turned conscientious objector. Can you
Right.
walk
Yeah.
us through that story? Because that sounds very interesting.
So I enlisted in the Illinois National Guard when I was 17 years old. My mom had to sign the paper and all that. And originally I was an 88 Mike, which is a truck driver. And, I got a lot of benefits out of the military. The Illinois National Guard has a great program where they waive tuition fees for public schools or state schools. Um, and so I did the whole ROTC thing. I should back up a little bit. I have 2 brothers in the military as well, 2 older brothers. One went active duty, was an intelligence guy, and my oldest brother went into Illinois National Guard as well. Before I ever enlisted, both of them had deployed multiple times, so I had a pretty good idea of how the military worked, and what the trade offs are. And when I was 17, I thought those trade offs would be worth it, and also because of the way I was raised, and the propaganda that we're all exposed to at a very young age, which that's something I have to work on articulating, is how exactly the propaganda that we're all exposed to kind of affects our conceptions of things. But for me, my perception of the military was it's going to make you tough, it's going to make you self-reliant, and it's an honorable thing to do, basically.
Yeah, be
And the
all that you can
education,
be.
be all that you can be, exactly. And the few, the proud, all of that. And the education benefits were kind of just the icing on the cake. I had decided by the time I was 17 that I was going to enlist in something, and I was just going to pick whichever had the best education benefits. And so the Illinois National Guard it was. I did the whole ROTC thing, commissioned in 2017 as a second lieutenant, and went on to flight school where Flight school was about 14 months long. And at the end of it, I was a qualified Black Hawk pilot. And then I made my way to my unit, which is how I ended up in Houston in the first place. My unit's out of Conroe, Texas. I trained with them for a couple of years. And then last October, or October 2021, my unit was mobilized, and we deployed in support of Inherent Resolve and Spartan Shield, which is a vast operation across multiple countries in the Middle East. And even though I was trained to be a pilot, I got stuck on staff. So the only thing I flew was a desk for the entire time. And
yeah, that's not exactly like Top Gun or movie material.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't Top
Probably
Gun.
a lot safer though.
Yeah, I don't want to oversell myself. I'm a pretty low hour pilot. I'm going to try to keep flying on the civilian side, but it was the whole process of this deployment that kind of solidified in me that I should not be in the military. It was 2017, around the time I was commissioning, that I was introduced to Tom Woods. I had a really good buddy in my former unit, and he was a big libertarian, and he was like, "You got to listen to Tom Woods. Stop listening to Ben Shapiro. Listen to Tom Woods."
Because I was like, well, hold on, that's great advice. That's what everybody should hear. Stop listening to Ben Shapiro and start listening to Tom Woods. No, I'm kidding. Yeah, listen to both, but you got to listen to Tom Woods. He's great.
Yeah, I mean, the history that I learned and the arguments that I heard on Tom Woods, they're kind of what took me to be a libertarian. And I was just like the regular TradCon white dude, listened to Ben Shapiro and thought I was super educated on politics. It is so cringe thinking back on the things I put on Facebook, dude. It was horrible. But
you should have said that, because now people are going to go and dig it up and be like,
"Oh, it's all deleted.
Don't waste your time. Is this you?
It's all deleted. Don't waste your time."
Oh, okay. Very smart.
But yeah, so by the time I commissioned, I considered myself a libertarian, and with that comes, an anti-war position. And shortly after that, I think sometime in 2018, I stumbled upon Greg Boyd, who is a PhD Princeton theologian, written tons of books. He's a lead pastor at a church in Wisconsin, I think, either Wisconsin or Minnesota. And he is a pacifist. His church is Anabaptist, which they are. They have deep roots with pacifist movements. And I saw I stumbled upon a sermon of his about the verses in Romans and the verses in specifically the verse in Romans 13, I believe, where it's all governments are established by God, and he laid out how that has been entirely misinterpreted, and the real meaning is closer to all governments are ordered by God, meaning as.
Oh, we froze again.
Oh my gosh, my internet.
Oh, that's better.
Okay.
Yeah, so you're talking about governments are ordered by God?
Yeah, so the closer meaning is governments are ordered by God, meaning he uses them as he can. God didn't put Hitler into power. What would that say about the God of the Bible? And that was an idea and a message I had never heard prior to 2018. I got to thinking on that, and just got deeper into that whole world. And my anti-war leanings got deeper and stronger. And by the time my deployment came around, I was planning on getting out of the military anyways. But the things I saw in my deployment and how the military works and how the military treats people really kind of solidified in me that I am against war in all forms, and I have to get out of this organization. I can no longer be here. It's not the place for me. And so I submitted a conscientious objector packet. And there's two types of conscientious objectors. You can either refuse to bear arms or you can refuse service. And I chose the refuse service option. And so it's a very long application process that goes all the way to the Pentagon. The Deputy Secretary of the Army is the guy that makes the final decision. Assistant Deputy Secretary of the Army, sorry. And so I was still deployed. But I was lucky enough, the leadership in my unit was very supportive, actually, surprisingly supportive, because that is not the history of conscientious objectors. Yeah. I've been doing some research on that, and it is a horrible history. And it kind of starts kind of starts in the Civil War. The Enrollment Act was passed in 1863 by Congress, and it basically said, well, that was the first draft. And after some rioting and after some other demonstrations and rigorous debates, they amended it and added a way for conscientious objectors, but purely on religious grounds, people could object to service.
Mm-hmm.
But you had to pay a $300 fee or find someone to fight in your stead. And $300 in 1863 is $7,100 today. So of course, poor people had no way out. They were stuck. And I think I misspoke. There was no religious exemption during the Civil War. That didn't come about until later. But even during World War I and on to World War II, conscientious objectors were imprisoned, they were tortured, and they were shunned by their communities as cowards simply for standing up for what they believe in, and actually living out their faith. There's one story of a guy, Robert Sims. He was an African American from Georgia, and he found himself sentenced to Alcatraz after refusing to fight in World War I. And while he was there, he was kept in a pitch black cell for 14 days at a time and confined to an iron cage without the ability to sit or turn around for 8 hours at a time. And he remained in prison more than a year after World War I ended. And so they really wanted to make a point. Like, prior to the present day, conscientious objectors were really looked down on and viewed as cowards. And the government made a point of deterring people from objecting to service. But luckily, that's not the case today. Not only are there plenty of laws protecting this belief system, but it's kind of, and it depends on what unit you're in. There's plenty of people in the military that respect it, and they respect the idea that if your heart's not in it, that you probably shouldn't be in the military to begin with.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. So, and my heart used to be in it. I used to love this sort of thing. I used to love and wanted to be in the military. Of course, I was the gung ho dude that was like, "Hey, I'm going to go special forces eventually. Let me submit my packet to go special forces." I'm glad I never did that. But yeah, so my packet was recently approved, and now I'm just awaiting a separation order. And after that, I will be, wash my hands of the military and really start focusing on my anti-war activism.
So let me ask you this. I mean, because I know that there probably wasn't just one thing that pushed you over the edge, but can you kind of talk to us a little bit about, speak a little bit to a few of the things that you saw and experienced? I mean, because I know you were listening to Tom Woods, in a lot of this is ideological, but can you just tell us about some of the things that you saw or experienced that really pushed you in this direction?
Yeah. Well, so the primary reason that I went through with this is because of my faith. I really believe that the Bible has strong things to say about violence and therefore war. And excuse me. Mm-hmm. Jesus was, if not a pacifist, he was one of the most peaceful people to ever live. He's one of the few people to actively to forgive people while they're torturing him. I don't know of any other story that is that compelling. And while I'm not a pacifist, I don't think the Bible necessitates that you be a pacifist. I think you should probably be pretty close to it. That's my opinion. Paul says, I believe it's in Romans, that as far and so that it depends on you, live peaceably with all others. And so I think that verse kind of leaves space for self-defense. But taking an oath to commit violence on order does not align with the Bible. And so that's why I'm against war of all forms, and why I had to get out of the military, because that's what it is. You take an oath to commit violence or to support a system that commits violence. And so, and that's why, refusing to bear arms was not enough for me, because even the occupations that are strictly support, you're supporting a system of violence.
Right.
And not, yeah. And even, I think the Bible says that even if the violence is justified, as in it's in self-defense, that's still not, well, so even if violence, in our opinions, is justified, as in, situations of self-defense. I don't think the Bible condones it, because it's the turn the other cheek verse.
Mm-hmm.
Where you're supposed to love your enemies. That's so very clear in the Bible to me, and all of that is antithetical to war.
So,
But
oh,
yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
well, so I wanted to ask you, because you do delineate between, taking an oath to go to war, if it's needed or wanted, and
Yeah.
self-defense. And I'm sure you get this question a lot. It's something that I've wondered about. I mean, there was a point was it in Acts? No, it was during the Gospels, where Jesus tells them to go buy a sword or buy two swords or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that may not justify war per se, but it does speak to the idea of self-defense. If somebody is attacking you or attacking somebody else, then you would have that sword. I mean, and I know people have talked about, oh, well, he said that so that Peter would have the sword and cut the guy's ear off, which, I mean, I know there's a lot of theories about that, but what's your take on the whole sword thing?
Well, like I said, I think the Bible does leave room for self-defense, but it's a very, in my opinion, it's a very small window.
Mm-hmm.
And the way I think about self-defense is you should use it in as limited a way as possible. If like, for example, I don't think you should shoot someone if they steal your purse or your wallet. You know, to me, a wallet with $100 cash in it and credit cards that you can cancel is not worth killing someone over.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you should restrain yourself from causing harm to others as much as you can. But,
Oh, we froze again.
this is killing me. My internet is never this bad.
Oh, yeah,
Am I back?
mine's been acting up too. But we're
Am I
good
back
now.
now?
Yeah.
Okay. Um, but I think if someone breaks into your house and they're intent on hurting you and your family, I think you can take the actions necessary to prevent harm to other life. Because that's kind of the trade-off: is harm this person's life or let them harm our life. Either way, life is being harmed, and so it's kind of up to it's it's whoever wins at that point
Yeah.
is who's gonna be harmed, I guess. But yeah, it's very gray. I don't think you can lay out. You can't logically think through every situation. It's very much a self defense is very much it's a matter of the moment. Um, and but all that being said, self defense, especially on an individual level, is very different than war. Self defense on behalf of a nation is very different than self defense when it comes to like a home invasion, I think.
Sure.
Which so that's kind of the way I think about it. And yeah, that's why I'm here today.
Yeah, and that's kind of in line with the way I look at it. And there's different ideas on this. I mean, I'm a gun owner. I conceal carry. I carry
Yeah.
everywhere I go. But in the gun community, I mean, it's established that should be the very last resort. Like, you exhaust every other options. Like, if you can run and escape, then you do that. The gun should only be used when it's absolutely necessary. But I mean, there are some people who do believe it to be justified if somebody's trying to steal your car or your wallet to shoot them. And in some cases that's even legal. Me personally,
Right.
If somebody wants to take my wallet, I don't want to end their life over that. I can cancel my credit cards and all that stuff. And I don't really carry a lot of cash. Anybody, but even if I had $100, do I really want to take a life over $100? Probably not. As long as I don't think that they're going to harm me after they take it, then I'll probably let it happen. But if it's an imminent threat, that's when you would do that, because I wouldn't be able to live with myself. Because first off, even if it is completely justified, you still took a life, and you're still going to deal with that trauma of having done that for most people. So I mean, it's a serious thing.
And violence, and in its worst form, violence is a cycle. And unless you refuse to opt out of that cycle, the violence perpetuates and gets worse. So I mean, I don't think inflicting violence on someone else for stealing your wallet solves anything.
Right.
And so that's kind of this. I just choose to opt out of that in every way possible. But of course, I'm going to defend my life and my family's life and my loved ones' lives.
Yeah, exactly. So being anti-war, what does that mean to you? What does being anti-war mean?
Um, I mean, in today's age, anti-war means end the global war on terrorism, bring all the troops home, probably disband the active duty service, and go back to. Well, that's a good question. I haven't thought about what that would mean. If I got everything I wanted, I don't know exactly what it would mean for the military. But at the very least, bring all the troops home,
Mhm.
shut down the 750 bases that we have across 80 countries, stop drone bombing all these poor Middle Eastern countries, end all military aid to Ukraine, and actively negotiate for an immediate ceasefire and peace between Ukraine and Russia. Um, like today, that is what that means to me. But when it comes to how I make the anti-war case, I like to focus on the human stories. And I have this theory that Americans, because of the global war on terrorism being the fluke that it is, and by that I mean only 7,000 American military service members were killed across the last 22 years of the global war on terrorism. Some 8,000 contractors as well. Like that is unheard of for a major conflict. If you look at if you look back to World War One, World War Two, all of the previous conflicts, I mean, it's the numbers are so small, and I think Americans have been inculcated to the realities of war, and we're seeing because of Ukraine, we're seeing in Ukraine that the horrors of World War One and World War Two can be repeated. Like
Mhm.
the UN recently did a report. They released a report that 100,000 Ukrainian soldiers have died and 20,000 Ukrainian civilians.
Mhm.
And that's from what has it been 8 months now since the invasion?
Yeah.
That's just in 8 months. And so I think Americans are totally removed from the realities of war, which is why they're so comfortable with all the saber rattling that we do. I mean, you spend one day on Twitter, and half of Twitter is saying that we should invade any country that disagrees with us or that or that is not democratic.
Mhm.
Which to me is insane. They don't understand the implications, and I would really like to kind of wake the American public back up to the realities of war. And so I'm working on a book right now called Code of Words: War Through the Eyes of Warriors. And in this book, it's a collection of some of the worst war stories from memoirs of conflicts from the 20th and 21st century. I'm starting with World War One. I'm reading as many memoirs as I can get my hands on. I'm picking out the stories and I'm going all the way through Afghanistan and Iraq, and hopefully through these stories and how horrible the experience is for people that live through war. Hopefully, I can convince people to become just a little bit more anti-war, or at the very least, just reconsider voting for someone that advocates any sort of military action. That's one of my goals, and my premise is we should all be anti-war simply because of how agonizing it is for people that live through it. I
Yeah.
mean, I've got some stories that I've read recently. Um, for example, the the story of in World War One, the first use of the flamethrower on the Western Front.
Mhm.
There are really good stories written by Philip Gibbs, who was a British reporter of the time, and Louis Barthas, who was a French soldier. Both of them saw early uses of the flamethrower on the Western Front. And that was a very new technology. It had only been invented, I think, about a decade earlier by a German inventor. And the Germans were the first to incorporate it. But it was a brand new technology they had no exposure to. And both of their stories are essentially they're like, we were just sitting in the trenches. Next thing we know, it's raining. It starts raining, and it smells like paraffin. And they're like looking around, wondering what's going on. And next thing I know, the entire trench is on fire.
Wow.
And it's um, Let me just read the
And
account
that's
from
one of
Louis
like the
Barth.
worst ways to go, burning.
It's got to be one of the worst ways to go. And they did it to vacate the trench because the tactic of the time was after the trenches were built, the tactic became bite and hold. They just tried, each side tried to grab whatever little piece of ground they could and hold on to it for dear
Yeah.
life. But the account from Louis Barth is, he says, "What is this? Has hell opened up under our feet? Are we right at the rim of a furious volcano? The trench is filled with flames, with sparks, with bitter smoke. The air is unbreathable. I hear hissing, crackling, and alas, yes, the cries of pain. Sergeant Verges has scorched eyes. At my feet, two miserable creatures are rolling on the ground, their clothes, their hands, their faces on fire, like human torches. And in the trench, everything is on fire. Blankets, tent, clothes, sandbags. The Germans had just fired some sort of incendiary liquid on us. What's more, a pack of signal fuses has just ignited, and that's what's causing the most noise. The most sparks, the most smoke. My two arms protecting my face. I flee from this hell. My senses completely overturned. I rejoined my squad. They tell me that my eyes stared vacantly, wildly, and that I spoke incoherently, but that didn't last, and I quickly got out of it." And it's stories like that that just hit me right in the gut. He's seeing people that he has spent at that point months getting to know, being burned alive in front of his eyes. And I just feel like people write this off as, oh, that was World War One. That doesn't happen anymore. No, it happens. It's
No,
happening
it
in
still
Ukraine
happens.
right now.
Yeah.
It's happening in Ukraine. The America, the United States military has inflicted that sort of pain on millions of people. Watson Brown, they did a really good report called The Cost of War, and their report estimates that 900,000 people, over 900,000, nearly a million, have died in the global war on terrorism directly from military conflict. So that's not even including people that died from dysentery, from destroyed water infrastructure, or from starvation because they no longer have food. Just think of what's going on in Yemen right now, and the atrocities that the American government is perpetuating hand in hand with Saudi Arabia and that government. We are refueling their planes. We are maintaining a blockade and blocking humanitarian aid from people that really need it. It's the worst cholera outbreak in history. So people are literally crapping themselves to death. And the United States government, and the media won't report on it, of course.
No,
you never hear anything about it. You never hear anything about it. And the United States government, this supposed bastion of democracy and morality, is perpetuating it. So yeah. I really hope to be able to tell through my books, I hope to be able to tell stories like this because people need to know the realities of war and what it means to advocate for military action, because Americans have totally lost sight of that. And the story of the flamethrower, that's not even getting into the horrors of the shellings that took place in World War One, and that's probably one of the most similar things that Ukraine is experiencing now when compared to previous conflicts is the shellings. Ukraine is just being blown to bits, and that's a hard experience to describe to someone. Like, how do you bring them to that place and to get them to understand what it's like to endure shell fire? And there was a German, he was a German officer, and during World War One, and he wrote his memoir called "The Storm of Steel." Ernst Junger is his name, and he wrote a really good description of what it's like to live through shell fire. And um, he says, "Thus I crouched in my little hole with my hand in front of my eyes, while all the possibilities of being hit passed through my imagination. I believe I have found a comparison that exactly conveys what I, in common with all the rest who went through the war, experienced in a situation such as this." He's talking about taking shell fire. "It is as if one were tied to a post and threatened by a fellow swinging a sledgehammer. Now the hammer is swung back for a blow. Now it whirls forward till just missing your skull, it sends splinters flying from the post once more. That is exactly what it feels like to be exposed to heavy shelling without cover."
Wow.
And I've been putting in some work to try to develop modern analogies for these experiences. And I think a good one for shell fire is imagine you're blindfolded and it's the middle of the night and someone pushes you out into the middle of a busy highway in Texas where people are driving 80 miles an hour,
Mm-hmm.
and you're forced by gunfire, because soldiers in World War One, if they vacated their trench, they would be shot
Yeah, you
or
got shot.
court-martialed
Yeah.
and shot, put up against the wall. So you're forced by gunfire to walk across this busy highway. You can feel the wind from the semis rushing past you. You can feel the vibrations. And at any minute, you don't know, but at any minute, because you can't see, at any minute you could be crushed and
Mm-hmm.
taken off the earth. And so the outcomes of that, of course, are shell shock. That's one of the one of the most severe outcomes and consequences of taking shell fire. So yeah, through my books, and eventually I'm going to get into anti-war fiction, which is that's a whole thing.
Yeah, is that a thing? Because there's a lot of war fiction,
and
definitely.
that's exactly what I was about to say. Is anti-war fiction, or is there really such thing as an anti-war movie? And I think there is a case that there's a few that exist, and the most recent being All Quiet on the Western Front.
I still need to watch that.
Oh, it is incredible. It is incredible. One of the most amazing depictions of war that I have ever seen. And there's quite a few historians that say the same thing. Like it's very accurate. Of course, there's some inaccuracies that they have to make for purposes of making the film, but there's an argument to be made that All Quiet on the Western Front is an anti-war story simply because there's no hero and there's no winning. The main character, he dies a pointless death in the end.
Wow.
And so I think that's the way an anti-war story has to be told. There can be no hero and there can be no winning.
Yeah, because that's how that reflects real life. And
exactly.
And speaking to what you said about as Americans, us being so disconnected from this stuff, because any war we fought over there. We haven't experienced it here. We had 9/11 and that was horrible, but other than that, not a whole lot. But this even dates back to even before World War I. One of the reasons why we got involved is because war was seen as a heroic, brave thing to do.
Yes.
There was a lot of jingoistic propaganda. We had just gotten out of the Spanish-American War, where we had very few casualties, and we had done very well. And so it was seen as, oh yeah, I'm going to go over on this trip, and we're going to not have fun, but kind of have fun. And I'm going to distinguish myself in battle and all this stuff. And then they got over there, and it got real. And then World War II happened shortly after, and it's just then people started to realize, okay, war is not a joke.
I'm really glad you said that, because that is one of the most fascinating things I have found in my research and my reading, is how through the generations, this idea that war is romantic and heroic and an adventure, it survives through the generations. Like it is right in our face. But it's somehow, and the propaganda probably, and just the way we are raised, we somehow still think that war is, I don't know if fun is the right word, but it's something worthwhile.
It's an adventure, like you said, an
adventure. And I like that same author that I quoted earlier, Ernst Younger, during World War I, he lays this out, and it is amazing how much it applies to today. And he says, we had grown up in a material age, and in each one of us there was a yearning for a great experience, such as we had never known. The war had entered into us like wine. We had set out in a rain of flowers to seek the death of heroes. The war was our dream of greatness, power, and glory. It was a man's work, a duel on fields whose flowers would be stained with blood. There was no lovelier death in the world. Anything rather than stay at home, anything to make one with the rest. That could have been wrote today. It's incredible to me.
Yeah.
And this was more than 100 years ago. But he goes on to say that they pretty much lost that illusion. Like pretty much on the first day of combat, they're like, oh, this is not what we thought it was going to be. And a couple of pages later, he says, after a short while with the regiment, we had pretty well lost the illusion with which we had set out. Instead of the dangers we had hoped for, only mud and work and sleepless nights had fallen to our lot. And the conquest of these called for a heroism that was little to our taste. The continuous exhaustion, too, was in part the fault of the higher command, which had not yet grasped the spirit of modern trench warfare. Like, so the war is just not what people think it is. And it's hard to realize. It's hard to realize unless you live through it. Most people never live through war. And so that's something I hope to do through my books is bring people to the battlefield, bring people into war, which is not all combat. It's not all death and agony. A lot of it is just boring. Louis Barthes
Yeah.
is that World War I French soldier. He compares it to being on a chain gang where,
Hmm.
at risk of court martial, you're forced to do this hard, repetitive labor. And from time to time, you see horrendous combat. I think that's pretty comparable to warfare today as well. There are even fewer stories of combat today, and most experience in the military is boring and gross. That's kind of how I describe it.
So let me ask you this then. When it comes to being anti-war, I mean, obviously, I think a lot of people are on board with the idea that we shouldn't be getting into these foreign military entanglements and things like that. But what about when we have been attacked, like on 9/11, or let's say if another country did attack us? You mentioned that you're not a pacifist per se, but how do you approach that?
Yeah, so as a conscious objector, I am opposed to war in all forms. And
Mhm.
so what that means to me is I don't think war is ever the answer. I don't think war is a necessary evil. I just think it's evil.
Mhm.
Because even if you set out to conduct a war with noble intentions and with intentions of and grounds of self-defense, such as World War II or invading Afghanistan, for example. Look at the outcomes. World War II, and this is a very controversial analogy that I like to make. But our understanding today of World War II is that we went in there to fight Hitler and save people from the concentration camps. And that is, if you're going to fight about something, that's something that you fight about, you know.
Right.
Um, but on the flip side, 30 million civilians died in World War
Yeah.
II,
Yeah.
and 6 million people died. 6 million Jews died in the concentration camps. So, I mean, that's some addition and subtraction that you can do, and it's I guess it worth it? And to some people, yes, but 30 million civilians dead.
Yeah.
That's an insane number. Um,
It's a
and
tough
the same
conversation, isn't it? I mean,
That's a
because when
tough
you make that
conversation. Yes,
comparison, and then there's also the other side. Well, if we hadn't gone, how much more would have died? I mean, and that's a valid question too. I mean, there's really
yeah.
no way to know. I mean, that's the tough
There's
part.
exactly. It's an impossible hypothetical. That's not my favorite conversation to have because there's so
Yeah.
much complicated history in all of it. And um, but maybe a better example is Afghanistan. I mean, we invaded Afghanistan to capture Osama or Bin Laden, and we kind of gave it up. We had a chance in late 2001, didn't do it. He escaped into Pakistan, and we didn't get him till what was it, 2008? So we didn't get him until 8 years later.
Hmm.
Um, and look at the consequences of Afghanistan. Um, I mean, that's it. Without Afghanistan, would we have gotten into Iraq? Maybe, maybe not. That was kind of
Yeah.
a
I don't think we would have.
probably not.
They use that
Probably
as an
not.
excuse to go into Iraq. Yeah. Bush
Yeah,
did, like,
that.
he jumped when we went into Afghanistan. It's very clear, according to reports, that he viewed that as an opportunity to say, "Oh well, now we can go
Yeah,
into Iraq," because he already wanted
yeah,
to before the war. Yeah.
yeah, and exactly. They wanted to before the war ever began, and oh crap, I'm blanking on his name. Secretary of the State at the time. He
I'm
recently
blanking.
passed away. I can't remember his name, but he gave the speech at the UN and demonstrated or laid out all the evidence that they believed they had for weapons of mass destruction and those mobile those trucks they said they had imagery
Oh,
of.
you're talking about Colin
Uh,
Powell.
Colin Powell, yes,
Yeah.
sorry, I knew it was Powell. I couldn't remember his first name. Colin Powell gave that talk at the UN, and he gave an interview with PBS before he passed away. And he said prior to that, to his talk at the UN, um, they had already decided like Iraq's going to happen. They're going to invade Iraq. He admits that,
Hmm.
and then he later admits that just a few weeks after his speech at the UN, the intelligence case for Iraq having WMDs pretty much fell apart. but the invasion went through. And yeah, they used this vague connection between bin Laden and Saddam Hussein to justify it as well. So Iraq probably wouldn't have happened without Afghanistan, and Afghanistan turned into a 20-year fight for literally nothing.
For
And this is why I
nothing.
say there's no winning in war, because we left it exactly how we found it. we gained nothing.
Exactly how, yeah.
We ended up fighting an organization that has never done us any harm outside of the borders of their own country. So it's just, I don't think the outcomes of war can ever justify a declaration of war.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. So last question. So are you involved in anti-war activism right now, or do you have to wait until after they put your paperwork through?
Well, I probably won't, just to be safe, I won't attend any like rallies or anything like that until I'm officially separated. But people in the military can speak their mind as long as they're not bad mouthing their leadership, essentially, or the president. So I've been putting stuff on Twitter for some time. I put anti-war stuff on Twitter. But eventually I will get into more kind of boots on ground activism. I want to get involved with the Defend the Guard bill, that movement, and bringourtroopshome.org.
Okay.
They're pushing the Defend the Guard bill across as many states as they can, which would require a formal declaration of war from Congress in order to mobilize a state's National Guard into a combat zone. I think that's a really good start. And so I would love to do more stuff like that and go to rallies. I want to go to Rage Against the War Machine one of these days. I don't know if I'll make it this year, but stuff like that, absolutely, I'm going to get involved in that.
Good. Well, I'll be looking forward to seeing what you do. Because Donnie and I are actually planning to go to the one in February. I don't know if your paperwork will be through by then, but yeah, it'll actually be my first anti-war rally, I think. Yeah, so that'll be interesting. But before we sign off, why don't you let everybody know where they can find you?
Yeah, if you follow me on Twitter, it's Claybert32, CLAYBERT 32. I'm more active on there these days. And if you want to read my blog, that's where I'm going to be putting out more of these war stories that I come across as I do my research for my book, kind of like serialized chapters, that sort of stuff.
Okay.
And that's divein.substack.com. That's where I'm going to publish all of that.
Awesome. Great. Well, thanks for joining up, and hopefully we'll have you back on later.
Awesome. I would love it. Thanks a lot, Jeff.
You got it.